Hello everyone, this is Mohammed from Python Ninja YouTube channel, and today we start a new series of tutorials to practice functions in Python. A function is defined as a block of reusable code that is used to reduce the loop and repeat similar line of codes many times. A function is also recalled or invoked after creating it by typing its name, then we use rounded brackets. As we initiate it, also we use the rounded bracket after this keyword. When we recall a function, we can place what is termed inside this function, which is termed as arguments, where the data that's sent inside the rounded bracket, which represent the arguments, can be string, can be integer, can be boolean, or any other data type. We have to remember that we need the same number of arguments to be placed inside the function when we build it. For example, if I design a function with two arguments, for example, A and B, then when we recall the function, we have to submit the same number of arguments, okay? Now we will practice how can we initiate or create a function. In general, this is the syntax of function. We use the reserved def keyword, okay? Then I have space. I can choose any name to name this function. For example, I can choose name bio for biography. Then I use rounded bracket without any space, and I use colon. This is mandatory to define the function. And then I press enter. We have to be ensured that we have indent here to start writing our code. Now we keep it blank. We just define a function without inserting anything. We cannot keep it without adding anything inside it. Otherwise, we will have an indentation error. We can use ellipses, which are 3 dots, just to tell the Python that I have a blank function, or can we use? Okay, we can use pass for keyword. By this way, I define a blank function in Python. Now, why do we need a function in Python or in any programming language? Because we want to design a block of reusable code, and we recall it or this block again and again without repeating this line of code. Let us practically describe that. Suppose I have this print function to say my name is Mohammed, okay? Then I will also add another print function here, okay? And I say, for example, I am 36 years old. I will also add another line, will add this one. I am developer. I will also add a print, for example, 50 stars, okay, like this. So let us execute this. It will be printed in the print screen here, and we will have 4 lines of code. If I want to repeat these lines again for any specific reason in our code, I can copy and repeat these lines of code, and when we execute them, they will be printed again since we copy this line of code. But that is not usually practiced when we design our own project, because the lower or the minimum line of codes is better to design your code. For that, we can use a function, okay, or we can design a function and then we reuse this function when we want to print or recall this line again. So I can design my own function. For example, here, what I will do, I will do like this. Okay, first of all, I have to go on the top and I use the keyword def, and I will say this is biography for myself, and I open these rounded brackets and I use a colon. Okay, then I have to select all line of code and press tab to save the indent. Okay, so we are not allowed to use any line of code in the same indent of the function, and we have to have one indent or like one tab space to design the functions. This is the structure or the footprint of the function. So when I run the code, I will have nothing because I inserted all lines of code under this function. So to execute this function or to print these lines of code, we have to invoke or recall this function. Okay, we can recall or invoke the function, and to recall a function, we only type its name, which is bio, and we use the same round brackets. So I run this function, then I can like recall the function. So by this way, we designed the structure of the function. We inserted what the code we want to insert. Remember, we cannot execute the operations or the lines under the function without revoking or recalling these functions, and we recall it by typing its name and preserving the rounded bracket here. So we can also like recall or invoke the function as many as we want. For example, I call this function 2 times, so it's printed 2 times. So instead of repeating this line of code 2 times, I just used one line of code to represent the repetition. Now, inside these parentheses or round brackets, we can send what is called the temporary variables. Okay, here at the design time, we call this what is located inside this function or inside these round brackets as temporary variables, and when we recall the function, we call them argument. Okay, so I can submit, for example, a variable which is name. Okay, now what I have to do, so adding some variables or temporary variables inside these parentheses add some functionality to the code I have. So I remove my name, okay, and I use this placeholder, okay, and I can send this the same variable or temporary variable inside this line of code. And when I revoke or recall the function, I have to send also the name that I want, the value of this variable, which is my name. For example, I can revoke the function or recall the function, and I cannot keep it without inserting the value of the variable name. Otherwise, I will have a problem. Here we have type error, the bio missing one required positional argument. Okay, so this is called also a positional argument or instance variable or temporary variable, but when we term this in, or we call this Pythonically as positional argument. In the next tutorial, we will be more familiar about positional argument and default argument. Okay, so let's call them positional argument, which are variables that we need to submit their value. Not so I cannot say like name like this, okay, because I need the value of the variables, okay, or the value of the positional argument, which will be Muhammad, okay, like this. So this is the value of the variable or of the instance variable or temporary variable. So when I execute this, so what I submitted as a value for this variable is located here and it's printed underneath. So adding these temporary variables or positional arguments inside the function will add some functionality. For example, I can revoke the function with the same structure but a different name. For example, I can say I have another value of the same temporary variable or positional argument for Mira, and I will have different now a name, which is my name is Mira, and but for this recall, and I have name Muhammad for this function. So we added some functionality so we can also achieve the adaptability in the code by just submitting inside the function the positional argument or the temporary variable. I can also add as many as I want. So, for example, I need name as a temporary variable or positional argument. I can also add age, okay? And here, instead of fixing the age, I can make my age is adaptable by just adding a placeholder with the same variable age or temporary variable. And here I have to notice that my function contains two temporary arguments or two positional arguments here or temporary variables, but here one. So when I execute this, I will have a problem, okay, unless I will need additional positional argument, which is the age. For example, for Muhammad, I can add different age for Mira, and that will be changed. So Muhammad come from this function, and the age come from also the first function. But here we have Mira associated with the next recall, and its age is different. So this is the favor. This is the rule of the function, is to add some like functionality or adaptability to my code, and it is used to reuse the like a block of code like this with many different cases, okay? And it depends on the value of the variable. So inside the function we submit. So this here is called, we call this as positional argument, okay? And inside the function, when we design the function, we consider them as temporary variables that we submit the corresponding value of these variables as a form of arguments, okay? So remember, in the design time, we have this as a temporary variables, and in the execution time, we have to submit the corresponding values, not the variable itself, but the value of the variables, and these are called at the recall or invoke time as positional arguments, okay? So we have to remember the functions parameters. When we submit the function, we have to when we design the function and recall it, we have to also insert the same number of variables, okay? And what I want to also highlight is the order of the variables. For example, if I, for example, here make a swap, okay, for this, I have the age at the first, then I have, for example, the name, okay, the name, okay. Now, when I execute this, okay, it will show to me my name is 35 and I am 100 years old. This is not logically acceptable. This is totally a mistake. Why? Because the order of the argument. So I submit this, okay, and it is associated with this temporary variables, and this is age, which would be the age, the numerical variable, but I submitted here the age because it's not restricted to be integer or whatever. So I submitted this variable and it is associated with the age. So where the age is, the value of the first argument will be, okay? And when the second argument, which is 35 here, is associated with the name. So please remember the order of the temporary variables when we design the function must be similar or to the positional argument when we recall the function. So this is, then I have to submit the first thing, the age, okay? Then we can submit the associated name, and here we follow the same thing here, okay, to have monotonically designed and recalled function. So here we have my name is Mohanna. However, we change this to follow this structure. Okay, let us also highlight another example. For example, let us make a function for bill invoice to add some variables or temporary variables like name, like amount, and due date. Okay, so I want to print, for example, dear value, for example, name. I want to place value for this variable name. I want to print, for example, inside your monthly expenses of US dollar, for example, and it is here I want to use amount. I want to use only two floating point, and can see is the due is the due, and I use a due date. Okay, the due date. I designed the function for billing system. And when I recall the function, I have to submit the name, I have to submit the amount, I have to submit the date that this amount should be paid, and we like associated each temporary variables inside this print. So I can revoke the function. For example, I can Mohana as name. Okay, then I need the amount. Amount should be, for example, 335.256, like this to it as a float, and we can submit our date, for example, in form of string. Okay, and I want to print this function, or the recall of the function, and yeah, we recall the function here and we printed it, or we do not need to print this function because already when we revoke the function it will be print. But if we go back, if I print this function and all items like all lines of code are print, we will have a new line of code with none. Okay, so when you see you have none, you have to remember that you already have a print to the result inside your function, so no need to reprint the function again. And we used or designed this build function, and we recalled it, and now we have their value 100, new monthly expenses, and we consider two floating point inside this print, and we have their due date. This is nothing but to practice the function more, and so far we highlight the structure of the function, the temporary variables, and the positional arguments. Okay, so you have to remember by yourself these terminologies. Okay, now in a function we use keyword return to end the function and return the result. How it could be used? For example, I want to define the some nums function which will take the first num. Okay, this is the num1, and it will take num2. Okay, I have two numbers. Okay, and I will design a result which will take number1 and it will add it to number2. Now we use return, okay, in the function. Why? To end this function, okay, this is the last line of code, to end the execution of this function and give me the result. So we return the result, okay. So we return the result. So this function will return the result to me, okay. Otherwise, it will not return the result. For example, I can recall the function. I will design, for example, the result here, okay, will be nothing but the some nums, and I want to add 10 and 20. Remember, here this function is different than this one function, so I can use underscore just to make it different, okay, result. Okay, so far so good. So we designed the function, and now we call this function, we submitted 2 numbers, okay, as what is requested, and I can print the result here, okay, and it is 30, and I can, for example, add this to 25 to the 20, but suppose I remove this result, okay, what I will have in hand, what I will have here, I will have none. Why? Because the return function is not used, so we use the return keyword again, and this return keyword will give me or return to me the result or what inside other variables. So I need from this function to give me this variable, so I want to return it, and as a result, when I recall the function, when I recall this function in this form, this result will be stored in this variable. So whatever located inside the whatever sum here will be returned in this variable, and then I print this variable. But when I remove this line, this is equally when I say that this function just sum 2 numbers and give nothing, so don't return to me anything. So I use the return to allow the function to give me the result of this variable or any variables. For example, I can add another variable here, and I can return that variables. Okay, so I hope this simplifies the intuition. So remember that in a function we use a return to give us like a result or what the function will make to me. Okay, so the function will return to me this variable. Okay, remember that we use return to return more than one variables. Okay, suppose this is a function. I have a function, for example, is called full name. Okay, and this full name will contain my first name as a variable or temporary variable, and my middle name, and it will contain my last name. Okay, and I use this form. So the first name will be nothing but my first name dot capitalize. We introduce capitalize method when we introduced the tutorial of string. So go back and see tutorial of string. I want to capitalize, so I can do what the operation I want to do on the temporary variables. Okay, and for example, I want also for the last name. For the last name, I want to use last name dot capitalize here. The same thing. So if I will not use return, this function will do nothing. But I can use, for example, print. Okay, so when I revoke the function, I can print the last name or first name like this. Okay, but it's not useful practice in this case. We can return this result or whatever we want from the variables, and later we print them. And this example just to show to you that I can return more than one variable or one result. For example, I want to return first name. Okay, so I want also to return another thing. I can use comma. I want to return my middle name. I want to return another thing. I want to return last name. So when I revoke the function here, it is mandatory to use a print. Okay, because there is no print statement that is used underneath here in the function, and I cannot show the result. So the function will give me this variable, these variables, but I want to visualize this, so I use a print, and inside this print I want to recall the function, and I want to use my first name Mohammed, and it starts with a small letter, and this capitalize will make the first letter in form of capital letter, and my middle name will face nothing, and my last name will be also in a form of small letter, and this line of code will capitalize it, okay, and it will be returned. So when I recall this function in this form, okay, what this function will do, this positional arguments, okay, is passed here, will be inserted here, and will be processed, okay. Each one will be processed according to the location where the positional argument is. So first name will be capitalized, middle name nothing, but last name also will be capitalized. And this function, the whole of this function, will return to me, okay, the same value, okay, in the same form but capitalized, and it will be printed. So when I use print, I will see, I will have the first name which is capitalized, and I will have the last name which is capitalized. So remember, the parameters inside the functions here, these parameters inside the function, we call them temporary variables. When we record the function, we call them as argument or positional argument in this case. Remember, again, we use return to stop the function and give us the result. Remember, we have to submit the same number of variables, of temporary variables, when we record the function. We give the same number of variables in form of positional arguments. Remember that when we submit these arguments or these positional arguments, it goes inside the function, and the order should be respected here, because we work in positional, not in default argument. In the next tutorial, you will understand the difference between positional and default arguments. Then when we submit this, it will go inside the function, and the function will perform the operation on each one, and it will return to you the same number of arguments, or any defined arguments you want, any variable you prefer. For example, I returned all variables, but if I want to return only first name, I do nothing, but I return the first name. Then I use comma, and I want to use, for example, last name. Remember, this form is a table form, so we can use them in this form. Let us see or check together if we can return a list and a variable. We can return them also in a form of list instead of table. So please remember these notes, and that's for today's tutorial, guys. And see you next tutorial, where we will highlight the default arguments, okay, and now we highlighted what is called positional arguments. Positional arguments, okay, in general, these are the argument that is submitted inside the function, which should be the same number with the same length of the temporary variables or the argument in general when we design a function. And also it comes like a variable without using any equal or without using any like equal like this. For example, if I go to the last name, I use here equal sign, then I use for example abukmail. Okay, this is called a default argument. That's what we will highlight in the next tutorial. Thank you.